Welcome back to Long Delays Hobbies. Today we're going to be painting up Helm Hammerhand, Wraith of the Hornburg. It's a really beautiful looking Forge World resin model from Games Workshop from the War of the Rohirrim movie that came out at the end of last year. From the scene where he's just giving the beatdown to a lot of hill tribesmen. So we're going to be using just the box art as a reference for our paint scheme. I think that fairly well matches the films. We're going to be starting with Administratum Gray Air, and that's going to be going over the top of his tunic. The tunic is a very, very light gray, not quite white. Administratum Gray is a very thin paint, so it took me about 3 to 4 coats to cover. Don't forget there is the bottom of his tunic, his leggings, that will need to be covered in Administratum Gray as well. Next up, I painted his flesh. I started with a base coat of good old reliable Bugman's Glow. A lot of his flesh is exposed in this model, so just go to town on his big muscly arms. He's got his big muscles, his face. A lot of that face is covered by his beard, which we're going to paint in a little bit. Don't forget about his ears, though. His ears are kind of tough to see. You kind of have to hunt them down underneath all that beard. The hammer hands are kind of an important part of the miniature, so make sure you take some time to work on those. The next piece of the model I painted was the piece of cloth that covered the tunic, and I covered that in a Rohan appropriate Caliban green. So next up, we're going to paint his boots, and I used Thondia Brown for his boots. And we're not going to paint the more purely white parts of the model. So that's going to be his trim of his tunic, as well as his beard and hair. We're going to base coat that using gray cere. I really wanted to differentiate the light gray versus the actual white parts of the model. So that's why I used 2 different grays here. It would be very easy for them to get lost in one another if I just base coated the entire lighter parts of the model with gray cere. The beard is obviously very extensive, so I just took my time and went through the different bits of the beard and hair without trying to go over the previously parted paints of the miniature. Next up, we're going to use some Mornfang Brown Air to paint the leather strap that holds up the mighty horn. We also use that to paint the belt that holds up the green cloak. Now he has a little bits of light colored cloth on either arm. I base coated those using Rakarth flesh. I also use those to base coat the little bits of cloth on the boots as well. Now we're going to start working on the horn. We're going to base coat the body of the horn using Dryad bark. Next up, we're going to paint his hero rock. That shows that if you weren't for sure already that he is a hero. We're going to paint that using some Mechanicus Standard Gray Air. We're also going to use Mechanicus Standard Gray to paint his right pant leg. The left pant leg is not exposed, so it will not be painted here. And we're now going to be painting the metallic parts of the horn using Retributor armor. So that'll be the mouthpiece, the end of the horn, as well as the little center bit in the middle of the horn are all going to be base coated in Retributor armor. Next up, Horn has a little piece of metal that protrudes from the middle of his cloth, just underneath his belt. We're going to base coat that in Balthazar Gold Air. There's also a little bronze piece at the end of his horn, which we're going to base in Balthazar Gold Air as well. So we've now finished our base coating. The trickiest part of this model, arguably, is the washing of the tunic. So we're going to accomplish that by doing a 50-50 wash of Nuln Oil and Lamian Medium. And we're going to use that to go over all of the bits that were done in Administratum Gray in the previous step, as well as all the bits that were, well, Gray Seer as well. Just be careful not to be too heavy-handed. Just gather up using a brush any bits that are pulled. I want to focus, of course, most heavily on the little crisscross patterns. Just try to avoid the large flat pieces, because there's really no reason for the wash to accumulate in there. We're now going to paint up the brown bits of the model with some Agrexo shade. So that's going to be the boots and the Rakarth flesh cloth, as well as the strap that holds his horn together. It's all going to be done with Agrexo shade. And we're going to coat his green cloth with some Biletang green. And following that, I went over his skin with Reikland Flesh Shade. I also went over the gold bits of the horn with Reikland Flesh Shade as well. And we are now finished with our washes. We're now going to bring that white back into the upper parts of the cloth. We're going to do that with Ulthuan Gray Air. So I just went through the diamond bits of the cloth and just kind of carefully traced over that diamond pattern that is already sculpted into the model. Now, Ulthuan Gray Air is a thin paint, so in many places I had to go over this more than once, but I did find that it produced an acceptable result. And don't forget when you're doing this that you have to go through not just the back, but the bottom bits of the miniature as well, where he has the lower parts of his tunic. Now going to do the green cloth with some warpstone glow. I felt like the warpstone glow really brought out the green of this lower part of the miniature. It did look quite desaturated until I had applied the warpstone glow. So we're now going to highlight up the skin. We're going to do that with some Cadian flesh tone. So we're going to go and start with his fingers and just get a fine point brush and go over his hammer hands, as well as I highlighted the upper points of his bulging muscles. They're very easy to pull out because they're very well sculpted in this miniature, so it was not a problem to only pick out his muscles. On his face, I picked out his forehead, his cheekbones, and his nose, as well as the bottom part of his lip and his ears. To highlight the strap, I used some Scrag Brown. And to highlight the boots, I use Gorthor Brown. I just went around all the different edges of the boots and picked those out. There's actually quite a few different edges of these boots. I just went and took my time going all the way around the miniature, looking for those different edges and highlighting those. I also used these on his right arm guard to highlight that bit as well. And now we're going to draw the little designs on his horn because it does have some striations on it. And for that, I used Baneblade Brown Air. Baneblade Brown is a thin paint, as are most air paints. So the initial result was rather thin. So I just drew the designs on a couple of times until I was happy with it. And now we're going to highlight up the more white parts of the miniature that were previously done in Gray Seer. We're going to do that with Army Painter Matte White. So I just went through and first started picking out the little bits of fur that were sticking out. And then I went through his hair and started picking out some strands. I probably didn't pick out every single strand, but I picked out the most prominent strands, including his mustache and the bits of prominent hair in the front, and just highlighted those with white to give his hair the appearance of actually being white, since he is in the film. His hair is really white rather than gray. And to give the skin an additional highlight, as his skin is rather pale in the films, I used Kislev flesh. And I just kind of went over what I had previously done with Cadian flesh tone, and just did it like maybe 30% less. I went over some of his muscles, his fingers, knuckles, his cheekbones, and his forehead, and just reapplied, but it's just in a little bit less of a fashion. To highlight the stone as well as his right pant leg, I used Dawnstone Air. And we're now going to highlight that little bit of brass that's hanging down from the middle of his belt. And we're going to do that with Ironbreaker. And we're also going to highlight the middle part of metal that's in the middle of his horn, as well as the other metallic bits of his horn, using Ironbreaker. And last but not least, Helm has beaten many hill tribesmen during this fight scene. So we're going to dry brush his knuckles using Corn Red to make it apparent that his knuckles are quite bloody. And that is Helm finished. He is ready to take on those aforementioned hill tribesmen. I hope you enjoyed watching this How I Painted video. If you have any comments about how I painted him, feel free to leave them in the comment section. Thank you very much for watching the video. We'll see you in the next one.